The meeting room on Galactic Council. Station Omega-7 was filled with worried voices. Representatives from 40 different species sat around the massive circular table. The air felt heavy with concern. Outside the tall windows, stars glittered against the darkness of space. But nobody was looking at the view. Everyone was focused on the holographic display at the center of the table. The display showed a star system called Luminina 9. The star at its center glowed with an angry red color. Numbers scrolled beside it, showing temperature readings, pressure measurements, and predictions. All the data pointed to the same terrible conclusion. The star was dying, and when it died, it would explode. Chancellor Orth floated above his seat. He was a Luminian made entirely of glowing blue energy. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. 6 months, he said quietly. Our scientists say we have 6 months before the supernova. 4 billion of my people live in this system. We need help. Large insect-like creature clicked his mandibles together. Ambassador Vexter represented the Krello Empire, one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. We have run the calculations, he said in his buzzing voice. To evacuate 4 billion energy-based life forms, we would need specialized containment vessels. Building enough vessels would take 15 years. You do not have 15 years. Around the table, representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to their assistants. Others studied their data pads, hoping to find a solution that wasn't there. Thin, gray-skinned alien stood up. She was from the Valen Collective, known for their mathematical abilities. We could evacuate some of your people, she offered. Perhaps 500 million, the rest. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Chancellor Orth dimmed slightly in Luminian body language. This meant deep sadness. 500 million is better than none, he said, but we would lose most of our civilization, our history, our culture, everything we have built over 10,000 years. Ambassador Vexler tapped the table with his sharp legs. The universe is not fair. Sometimes survival requires sacrifice. We will help evacuate who we can. The Krello will contribute ships and resources. Other representatives nodded and began offering their own contributions. Ships' cargo holds supplies. Everyone wanted to help, but the math was simple and cruel. There wasn't enough time. There wasn't enough technology. Billions would die when that star exploded. The far end of the table, in a section reserved for newer council members, sat 3 humans. They had been listening quietly the entire time. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 30 years ago. Humans were still considered newcomers, almost children compared to species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Dezhou was the human diplomat. He was a man in his mid-40s with gray beginning to show in his dark hair. He wore a simple blue uniform with Earth symbol on the shoulder. He had been taking notes on his data pad, occasionally glancing at his 2 companions. Next to him sat Jai Wu, the chief engineer. She was younger, in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been studying the star system data since the meeting began. On Dezhou's other side was Yuna, a scientist who specialized in exotic matter and energy states. She was the youngest of the 3, barely 30. But she had 3 advanced degrees and had published papers that had impressed even the oldest galactic universities. The three humans had been quietly discussing something among themselves. Other representatives had noticed, but paid little attention. What could humans possibly contribute? Earth's technology was primitive compared to most galactic species. Humans were good at adapting alien technology, but they rarely invented anything new. Chancellor Orth was preparing to speak again when Dezhou raised his hand. It was a simple gesture, polite and calm. Some representatives didn't even notice at first. The Chancellor paused. Yes, the human delegation wishes to speak. Dezhou stood up slowly. He didn't look nervous or excited. His expression was calm, almost casual. We can do it, he said simply. For a moment there was complete silence. Then someone laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Others joined in, trying to be polite but unable to hide their disbelief. Ambassador Vexler, as mandibles clicked rapidly, which was the Krellel equivalent of laughing. You can do what exactly? Build 15 years of infrastructure in 6 months, evacuate 4 billion Lamenians safely, Dezhou replied. His voice remained calm and even. All of them. Within 5 months, the laughter grew louder. Even some of the more diplomatic species struggled to maintain their composure. The Valen mathematician shook her head sadly as if she felt sorry for the humans' ignorance. Perhaps you do not understand the scale of this problem, Vexler said, his tone now carrying an edge of annoyance. We are discussing the evacuation of energy-based life forms. Your species still uses matter-based vessels. You cannot even properly contain a Lamenian without specialized equipment that you do not possess. Jai Wu stood up beside Dezhou. She tapped her data pad and a new holographic display appeared beside the star system. It showed complex schematics, energy flow diagrams, and mathematical formulas. We've been working on quantum containment field technology, she said, modified for energy-based life forms. We use fusion antimatter hybrid reactors for power. The containment fields can be worked together for redundancy. Yuna stood as well, adding her own display to the hologram. Human scientists have been experimenting with exotic matter states. For 20 years, we've successfully contained and transported plasma-based organisms in laboratory conditions. Luminians are more complex, but the principle is the same. We can scale up. The laughter had stopped. Now there was just confused silence. Representatives looked at the human schematics, trying to understand what they were seeing. Ambassador Vexler studied the displays carefully. He was many things, but he wasn't stupid. After a long moment he spoke. These designs are ... interesting but theoretical, untested. At this scale, you are proposing to risk 4 billion lives on experimental technology. We're proposing to save 4 billion lives, Dezhou corrected gently. With your permission, we'll bring our fleet and equipment to Luminina. We'll build the evacuation system. If it works, everyone lives. If we fail, you're no worse off than you are now. Chancellor Orth floated closer to examine the human displays. His energy form pulsed with different colors as he processed the information. You truly believe you can do this? Yes, all 3 humans said at the same time. The Chancellor looked around the room at the other representatives. Does anyone else have a better solution? No one spoke. Then I accept the human offer, or said, you have 5 months. Please do not fail us. Dezhou bowed respectfully. We Won't, as the meeting ended and representatives began to leave. Ambassador Vexler approached the human delegation. I hope you understand what you have promised, he said quietly. If you fail, you will be responsible for the greatest disaster in modern galactic history. Your species' reputation will be destroyed. Dejo met his gaze calmly. We understand. We in LT Unc and GT, LLC you at Luminina 9. As the humans left the council chamber, other species watched them go. Some looked hopeful, most looked skeptical. A few Krell engineers in the observation gallery were already placing bets on how quickly the human mission would fail. None of them knew what was about to happen. None of them truly understood what humans meant when they said we can do it. They were about to learn. The human fleet arrived at Luminina 9 3 weeks after the council meeting. 200 ships dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of the system. They weren't impressive ships, not by galactic standards. Most of them were cargo vessels, construction platforms, and support craft. They looked bulky and industrial, covered with external equipment and cargo pods. Observation drones from a dozen different species watched the human arrival. The drones transmitted everything back to their home worlds. Millions of beings across the galaxy were watching to see what the humans would do. Some watched with hope. Most watched with curiosity about how badly the humans would fail. On the bridge of the lead ship, the UNSS Horizon Jew stood looking at the tactical display. 50,000 humans had volunteered for this mission. Engineers, technicians, scientists, construction workers, logistics personnel, medical staff. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone had come anyway. Timon walked onto the bridge carrying a data pad. He was the construction crew chief, a big man, his 50s, with scarred hands and a rough voice. He had spent 30 years building structures on hostile planets, asteroid mines, and deep space stations. All crews report ready, he said. Equipment checks complete. We can start immediately. Begin construction of the gate network. Follow the blueprint exactly. Tammin grinned. You worried we'll mess it up? I'm worried we don't have time for mistakes, Zhu replied, but she smiled slightly. Within hours, the human fleet spread throughout the Luminina system. Construction ships moved to designated coordinates. Massive cargo pods detached and began unpacking equipment. Supply vessels started organizing logistics chains. Everything moved with precise coordination. The first observation reports confused the alien observers. The humans weren't building one large evacuation gate, which was the standard galactic approach for mass evacuations. Instead, they were building dozens of smaller structures at different points around the system. On the Krell observation ship, Ambassador Vexter watched the construction begin. A young Krell engineer stood beside him. They're building 47 separate gate nodes, the engineer reported. Each node is relatively small. I don't understand their strategy. Neither do I, Vexter admitted. Request permission to contact the human command ship. A few minutes later, Jew and LT Unc and GT's face appeared on the communication screen. Ambassador, she greeted politely. How can I help you? I'm curious about your design, Vexler said. Why build many small gates instead of one large one? You lose efficiency. You increase failure points. Who pulled up a schematic on her end? Redundancy and parallel processing. If we build one giant gate and it fails, The entire evacuation stops with 47 gates. If one fails, the other 46 keep working. We can evacuate through multiple channels simultaneously. It's faster and safer. The Krello engineer's antenna twitched with surprise, but coordinating 47 separate systems is complicated. Yes, Vu agreed. But we brought good computers and good people. We can handle it. Over the next few weeks, the human construction efforts continued. Tammen's crews worked 18-hour shifts, rotating teams to maintain constant progress. They used construction methods that seemed crude to observers: simple magnetic clamps, basic welding, modular components that snapped together like children's toys. But the methods worked, and they worked fast. The humans didn't waste time on elegant solutions. They built what was needed, tested it, and moved on. When something broke, they fixed it immediately and kept going. Hygiene arrived on the second week. She was an AI specialist, a thin woman in her late 20s who rarely looked up from her multiple data pads. She brought with her a network of thousands of micro-satellites. Each satellite was small, barely larger than a human hand. But together they created a web of interconnected sensors, an energy field generators. Deploy satellite network in orbital pattern 7. She instructed her team, I want full coverage of all gate nodes within 72 hours. The satellite spread throughout the system like seeds blown on the wind. They positioned themselves with mathematical precision, creating an invisible web of energy fields that would contain and guide the Lamenian evacuees during transport. Dasung Diho managed the logistics from the horizon. He had been a military supply officer for 15 years before joining this mission. He understood that battles weren't won by the best weapons, but by making sure the right supplies arrived at the right place at the right time. Construction Team 5 needs more power couplings, he noted, reviewing his screen. Supply ship Delta 7 can reach them in 3 hours. Food delivery to Gate Node 12 is scheduled for 1,400 hours. Medical supplies to the main construction platform. His assistant, a young woman named Yunji, looked overwhelmed. How do you keep track of all this organization? Suho replied, simply, everything has a place. Everything has a schedule. Follow the system and the system works. The human system did work. Food arrived when crews got hungry. Replacement parts appeared before the old parts wore out. Medical staff positioned themselves near the most dangerous work sites. Rest shifts rotated so nobody worked until they collapsed. Other species watching the operation began to notice something unusual. The humans weren't rushing. Despite the time pressure, despite the enormous task, they moved with calm efficiency. They didn't panic when small problems appeared. They solved the problems and continued working. By the end of the first month, the framework was complete. All 47 gate nodes stood in position, connected by Hygiene's satellite network. The basic structure was done 2 weeks ahead of the schedule the humans had privately set for themselves. On the Krello observation ship, the young engineer ran calculations. This is impossible, he muttered. They should be further behind. Construction time alone, Ambassador Vexler clicked his mandibles. Thoughtfully, perhaps we have underestimated them, but he sent a message to the human fleet anyway. It appeared on GU and LT, UNC and GT's screen during her Sleep shift, she read it while drinking her morning coffee. The easy part is finished, the message said, building. The structure is simple, making it work will destroy you. The actual evacuation requires precision you cannot achieve. You will fail when it matters most. K. Wu forwarded the message to Dezhou, who was working on diplomatic coordination with the Lamenian government. Another encouraging note from our Krello friends, she wrote. Dezhou's reply came back within minutes. Send him our standard response. Zhu smiled and typed a brief message back to Ambassador Vexer. We're just getting started. The second month began with testing. The humans couldn't risk testing on actual Luminians yet, so they used artificial plasma constructs that mimicked Luminian energy signatures. The first test involved transporting a single construct through gate node 1 to receiving station 10 million km away. Not every species watching expected this test to fail. Transporting energy-based life forms was incredibly difficult. The containment fields had to be perfectly calibrated. The slightest error could disperse the energy being into space, killing them instantly. Hygiene ran the test personally. She stood in the control center surrounded by screens showing data from hundreds of sensors. Containment field stable, she announced. Power levels optimal. Beginning transport sequence. The plasma construct entered the gate. For 3 seconds every sensor showed green, then suddenly several readings spiked into the red. Alarms blared. The containment field collapsed. The construct dispersed harmlessly since it wasn't alive, but the test had failed. On the observation ships, aliens nodded to each other. This was what they had expected. The humans had built an impressive structure, but making it actually work was beyond their abilities. On the horizon, Zhu stared at the data. Tammin stood beside her. What happened? He asked. The field harmonics were wrong, Yuna said, appearing beside them. She had been studying the sensor data. The energy signature of the construct interfered with the containment field. They created a feedback loop. Can we fix it? Dezhou asked from his position near the back of the control center. Yuna was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she nodded slowly. Yes, we need to invert the field polarity. Add a harmonic buffer between the containment layer and the transport layer. It will absorb the interference. Di Wu looked at her calculations. How long will the modifications take? 72 hours, Yuna replied. Maybe less if everyone works together. Then we work together, Dezhou said simply. The humans didn't announce their failure to the other species. They didn't make excuses or ask for help. They simply started fixing the problem. Engineers worked around the clock modifying the gate system. A Yuna's team ran simulation after simulation, testing different configurations until they found one that worked perfectly. 70 hours after the first failure, they ran the test again. This time the plasma construct passed through the gate cleanly. All senses stayed green. The containment field held perfectly. The construct arrived at the receiving station intact and stable. The control center erupted in quiet celebration. Humans didn't cheer loudly or celebrate dramatically. They smiled, shook hands, and then got back to work. There was still so much to do. Ambassador Vexler saw the successful test data. He said nothing. The third month started with a crisis. The dying star at the center of Luminina 9 became unstable earlier than predicted. Massive solar flares erupted from its surface, sending waves of radiation through the system. The stellar scientists updated their calculations, and the news was bad. The supernova timeline has moved up, Chancellor Orth announced during an emergency communication with the human fleet. His energy form flickered with worry. 2 weeks earlier than expected. You now have 3 months and 2 weeks total time remaining. On the bridge of the horizon, the command team gathered to discuss the new timeline. Jiu displayed the work schedule on the main screen. Red markers showed tasks that hadn't been completed yet. There were a lot of red markers. We're behind now, Tammin said, stating the obvious. We can push the crews harder, extend the work shifts to 20 hours. No, said a new voice. Bara had just entered the bridge. She was the crisis management specialist, a calm woman in her 40s who had handled emergency evacuations on 3 different planets. Exhausted workers make mistakes. Mistakes kill people. We stick to 18-hour shifts with proper rest. Then, how do we make up the time? Tammin asked, frustrated. Dapper Ub pulled up a different set of plans on the display. We activate the contingency protocols, the backup systems we've been building. Quietly, Djo smiled slightly. You mean the systems we didn't mention to anyone else? Those ones exactly, Boer confirmed. The truth was that the humans had been building backup systems from the beginning. Extra power generators, redundant control networks, alternative evacuation routes. They had done this quietly, not mentioning it in their reports or briefings. It wasn't dishonest, it was just being prepared. We don't trust perfection, Ju had explained to her team in the first week. We trust backup plans, always assume something will go wrong and have a solution ready. Now those backup systems would save them time. Boer's team activated secondary construction platforms that had been sitting dormant. They brought online additional power systems that had been held in reserve. Suddenly, the work schedule that had been impossible became merely very difficult. The human crews adapted immediately. They didn't complain about the accelerated timeline. They simply adjusted their work and continued. Jinseo, the field medic and morale officer, made sure everyone stayed healthy and focused. Jinsok was a quiet man who noticed things. He noticed when someone looked too tired, when someone seemed stressed, when someone needed to talk. He would appear with hot coffee and a calm presence, ready to listen. How are you holding up? He asked a young engineer named Minyu, who was working on Gate Node 23. Minyu rubbed his eyes, tired, worried. The timeline change is scary. Scared is okay, Jinyo said, sitting down beside him. Scared means you understand the stakes, but look around, see all these people. Every one of them is doing their job perfectly. We're going to make this work. How do you know? Junio smiled. Because humans don't give up. We never have. We won't start now. These small conversations happened throughout the fleet. Jinseo and his medical team kept people healthy in body and mind. They understood that this mission would fail if people broke down under stress, so they made sure nobody broke down. Meanwhile, Yuna was making a breakthrough in the science lab. She had been studying the Luminians closely, working with several Luminian volunteers who wanted to help with the evacuation preparations. What she discovered changed everything. They're not as fragile as we thought, she explained to Ju and Djo. The Luminians can actually stabilize their own energy signatures if we give them partial Control of the containment fields, GEO. Look surprised, you want to let the evacuees operate critical systems, not fully operate but participate. UNA. Clarified, think of it like steering a vehicle together. We provide the power and structure. They provide fine adjustments based on what they feel. They know their own energy states better than any sensor we have. Joe understood. Immediately, collaboration instead of control. Exactly. This was a radical idea. In most galactic evacuations, the evacuees were treated like cargo. Passive, helpless, they were loaded into containers and transported by others. But humans had always believed in giving people control over their own fate when possible. Dr. Wu redesigned the gate systems to include Lamenian input controls. It took a week of intensive work, but the results were impressive. When they tested the new system with Luminian volunteers, the transport became smoother and more stable. The Lamenians could sense problems the sensors missed and correct them instantly. Chancellor Orth watched one of these tests in person, floating in the observation area of Gate Node 7. He saw a Lamenian volunteer pass through the gate using the human interface to stabilize himself during transport. The volunteer arrived perfectly intact, without any discomfort. This is remarkable, Aurora said to Una, who was monitoring the test. No one has ever thought to give us agency in our own evacuation. Una looked surprised. Why wouldn't we? It's your lives at stake. You should have a say in how you're saved. This simple statement would be repeated across the galaxy in the coming weeks. Species that had existed for thousands of years were shocked by the basic respect humans showed to those they were helping. It seemed obvious, once said, but somehow no one else had thought of it. News of the human approach spread through the Luminian population. Fear began to change into hope. These strange beings from Earth weren't just building machines, they were building a partnership on the Krello observation ship. Ambassador Vexler watched the latest test results with growing amazement. They are letting the evacuees control critical systems, he said to his engineering team. This violates every evacuation protocol we have, and yet it works better, the young engineer replied quietly. Vexler clicked his mandibles in thought. Perhaps protocols weren't always right. Perhaps the Krello had something to learn from these young humans. The third month continued with steady progress. Gate nodes were completed one by one. Power systems came online. Hygiene satellite network expanded to cover every necessary area. The web of energy fields grew stronger and more sophisticated. Each day, Mang worked in the experimental physics lab, a small ship dedicated to testing new ideas. He was a middle-aged man who had spent his career pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Now he was developing the harmonic buffers that made the whole system work. The problem with energy beings, he explained to his team, is that they're constantly fluctuating. Like ocean waves, we can't stop the waves, but we can build systems that ride them smoothly. His buffers did exactly that. They absorbed the natural fluctuations in Luminian energy signatures and converted them into stable patterns the gate systems could handle safely. It was elegant work, combining mathematics, physics, and intuition in equal measure. By the end of the third month's second week, the major construction was complete. All 47 gates stood ready. The power systems hummed with contained energy. The control networks connected everything into one coordinated whole. The backup system stood ready to activate if anything failed. To be reviewed. The status reports and allowed herself a small smile. We're actually ahead of schedule again, she told Dezhou. Even with the timeline change, Dezhou looked at the reports carefully. He didn't celebrate yet. There was still too much that could go wrong. Begin final systems checks, he ordered. I want every gate tested 3 times, every power coupling inspected, every sensor calibrated. Human teams conducted the most thorough testing the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't just check if things worked, they checked why they worked, how they worked, and what would happen if they stopped working. They found and fixed dozens of small problems that could have become disasters. Other species watching the operation were beginning to feel something they hadn't expected: respect. These humans, so new to the galaxy, so primitive in many ways, were accomplishing something that older and more advanced species had declared impossible. They are thorough, a valiant mathematician observed to her colleagues. Painfully, carefully thorough. They assume nothing, they check everything. It is inefficient but effective, perhaps. Efficiency is not always the goal. Another Valen replied thoughtfully. Perhaps sometimes thoroughness matters more. As the 3rd month ended, Ambassador Vexler sent another message to the human fleet. This one was different from his earlier dismissive notes. Your progress is impressive, he wrote. The Krell Empire acknowledges that you may succeed. If you require any assistance, we are prepared to offer it. Dezhou read the message and nodded. Progress, not just in building gates, but in building relationships. Thank the ambassador, he told his communication officer. Tell him we appreciate the offer. We'll let him know if we need anything. The 4th month was about to begin. The real test was coming. The 4th month began with the evacuation. Everything humanity had built, tested, and prepared would now face the ultimate test. 4 billion living beings needed to be moved to safety, and there was no room for failure. On the first day, Jiu stood in the main control center aboard the Horizon. Hundreds of screens surrounded her, each showing data from different gate nodes, power systems, and sensor networks. Her team sat at their stations, ready to respond to any problem. All systems green. Hygiene reported from her AI monitoring station. Satellite network optimal. Gates 1 through 47 ready for operation. Tamman checked in from the main construction platform. All crews in position. Maintenance team standing by. At each gate node, we're ready. Chancellor Orth's glowing form appeared on the main communication screen. Behind him, millions of Lamenians waited. Organized groups, ready to evacuate their dying system. We are ready as well, he said. My people have prepared. We trust you. Those last 3 words carried enormous weight. 4 billion lives trusting in human ability. Dezhou felt the responsibility, but he didn't let it show. He simply nodded calmly. Begin evacuation. First wave, 200 million evacuees. Let's bring them home. The gates activated simultaneously. Energy fields hummed to life across the Luminina system. The first group of Lamenians approached Gate Node 1. They were nervous, their energy forms flickering with uncertainty. This was the moment of truth. The first Luminian entered the gate using the human-designed interface to stabilize himself. For a moment, the sensors showed slight instability. Then the Luminian made a small adjustment using the control interface, and the readings smoothed out. 3 seconds later, he emerged from the receiving gate in the new system. 10 light years away, he was alive, he was stable, he was safe. First transport successful, Yuna announced. Checking the medical sensors, evacuee reports no discomfort, all vital signs normal. Then the second Luminian went through, then the third, then thousands at once, flowing through all 47 gates. A coordinated stream. The human system worked exactly as designed. The distributed network approach meant that evacuees could use whichever gate was closest and least crowded. The flow organized itself naturally on observation ships throughout the galaxy. Species watched in amazement. The Krell engineering team ran calculations frantically. This should not be possible, the young engineer said. Coordination required the precision. How are they doing this, Ambassador? Vexler had stopped trying to find fault. He simply watched, learning. They are better prepared than we understood, he said quietly. The first day ended with 200 million Laminians safely evacuated. 0 casualties, 0 arrows. The operation had gone more smoothly than any mass evacuation in recorded galactic history, but there was no celebration on the human ships. They had barely started. There were still billions more to evacuate and only a few months remaining. The second week of the 4th month brought a routine that everyone settled into. Every day, hundreds of millions of Laminians passed through the gates. The human crews worked their shifts with mechanical precision, but they never became careless. Every evacuee mattered. Every life was precious. Genio moved through the fleet, checking on the crews. He found a young technician named Sora sitting alone during her rest period, staring at nothing. What's wrong? He asked gently. Sora looked up, tears in her eyes. I made a mistake today. Just a small one, a calibration error. It didn't hurt anyone, but it could have. I almost killed someone through carelessness. Jinsuk sat down beside her. Did you fix the error? Yes. Immediately. Did anyone get hurt? No. Then you did your job correctly. You caught the mistake and fixed it. That's not failure. That's the system working. He paused. We're human, we make mistakes. That's why we build systems with redundancy and backups. That's why we check everything, not because we're perfect, but because we're not. So Ra wiped her eyes. How do you all stay so calm? 4 billion lives depend on us. We stay calm because panic helps no one, Genio replied, and because we trust each other. You didn't face that error alone. Your team was there, your backups were there. That's how humans work together. These conversations happened throughout the fleet. Jinsuk and his medical team provided the emotional support that kept people functioning under incredible stress. It was invisible work, but absolutely essential. By the end of the 3rd week, over 2 billion Laminians had been evacuated. The operation was halfway complete, and still there had been no casualties. The galactic observers had stopped looking for human failures. Now they were trying to understand human success. The Valen collective sent a team of mathematicians to study the human operation. They were given full access to all systems, all data, all procedures. The head mathematician, a thin gray woman named Zell, spent days reviewing everything. Their mathematics are not superior to ours, she reported to her government. Their technology is not more advanced, but their approach is different. They assume multiple failures and prepare. Accordingly, they build relationships. With those they help, they value thoroughness over speed, but somehow achieve both. Can we replicate their methods? Her superior asked. Zell was quiet for a long moment. The methods? Yes, the mindset. She struggled for words. They genuinely care about each individual life, not as abstract numbers, but as beings that matter. I do not know if that can be taught. Then in the fourth week, disaster struck. Massive solar flare erupted from the dying star, much larger than any previous flare. The wave of radiation and energy slammed into the gate network. Like a hammer, 8 gate nodes were damaged instantly. Sensors went offline. Power systems fluctuated wildly. Alarms screamed throughout the control center. Red indicators flashed on dozens of screens. For the first time since the operation began, the smooth flow of evacuees stopped. Gates 12, 15, 19, 23, 29, 34, 38, and 42 are offline. Hygiene reported, her voice steady despite the crisis. Structural damage to the gate frames, power couplings severed. They're not operational. How many Lamenians were in transit? Dejoe asked immediately. All transits completed successfully. Before the shutdown, Una confirmed. No casualties, but we've lost 8 gates. We're down to 39 operational nodes. T-Man was already moving. I'm deploying repair crews immediately, but the damage is extensive. Repairs will take days. We don't have days, Boris said, pulling up the schedule. We're supposed to evacuate 500 million today, with 8 gates down. We can't maintain that rate. The observation ships watched carefully. This was the crisis everyone had been expecting. The moment when human systems would fail under pressure. Several species began preparing rescue ships, ready to help evacuate who they could. When the human operation collapsed, but it didn't collapse. Jiu studied the network display for exactly 30 seconds. Then she started giving orders. Reroute all traffic from damaged gates to the nearest operational gates. Hygiene expand the satellite network coverage around the remaining 39 gates to handle increased load. Mong increase power to the harmonic buffers by 20%. We need them to handle more concurrent transports that will stress the remaining gates significantly. Mong warned. Can they handle it? Jiu asked. Mong ran quick calculations. Yes, but there's no safety margin. We'll have to live with that. Make it happen. Within an hour, the evacuation resumed. Instead of stopping to repair the damaged gates, the humans simply rerouted everything through the remaining 39 gates. The system had been designed with exactly this kind of redundancy in mind. The remaining gates began operating at higher capacity than originally planned, but the human Lamenian cooperative control system handled the increased load smoothly. The Luminians adjusted their energy signatures to flow more efficiently. The humans fine-tuned the systems in real time to accommodate the changes. The evacuation continued without pause. 500 million Lamenians were evacuated that day, exactly as scheduled. Meanwhile, Taman's repair crews worked on the damaged gates. They didn't sleep. They barely ate. They simply worked, replacing damaged components, repairing structures, restoring systems. The repairs that should have taken days were completed in 72 hours when Gate 12 came back online. A cheer went up from the repair crew. Then they immediately moved to Gate 15. Then 19, one by one the damaged gates were restored to operation. How are they doing this? Ambassador Vexler asked his engineering team. They are performing repairs while maintaining full evacuation operations. We would have had to shut down everything to make these repairs safely. The young Krell engineer had an answer. Now they don't shut down because they built the system to not need shutdowns. Every component can be accessed and replaced while the system operates. It is wasteful of resources, but effective in crisis. Wasteful, Vexer repeated thoughtfully. Or prepared. We called them primitive. Perhaps we were looking at the wrong things. By the end of the 4th week, all 8 gates were operational again. The evacuation had never stopped. Over 3 billion Lamenians were now safe in their new system. Chancellor Orth sent a message to the human fleet. You promised you could do this. We believed you, but we also doubted. The 5th month began with quiet determination. The human fleet had evacuated 3 billion Lamenians safely. 1 billion remained in the dying star system, and time was running out. The star was becoming increasingly unstable. Solar flares erupted daily. Now the stellar scientists predicted they had perhaps 3 weeks before the supernova. On the 10th day of the 5th month, the last group of Lamenians entered the evacuation gates. Jaiwu watched the final numbers tick down on her display. 4,300,000. 4,600,000. 4,900,000. Then finally the number stopped changing. 4 billion Lamenians had been evacuated, all of them, not a single casualty, not a single being left behind. The control center was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. The applause spread through the control center, then through the entire fleet. 50,000 humans celebrated quietly, professionally, but with deep satisfaction. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched in amazement. The humans had done exactly what they promised. They had accomplished what every other species called impossible, and they had done it ahead of schedule. Chancellor Orth appeared on every human ship's communication screen simultaneously. His energy form glowed brighter than ever before. The Luminian expression of profound joy. You saved us, he said. Simply, all of us, we will remember this forever. Humanity will always have the friendship and gratitude of the Lamenian people. Dezhou accepted the thanks gracefully. We're glad we could help. Now please excuse us. We have one more thing to do. The communication cut off. Chancellor Orth looked confused. One more thing. The evacuation was complete. What else could there be? On the horizon, Jiu pulled up a new set of schematics. These showed massive structures that had been built in secret, hidden among the construction platforms and supply ships. Even the observation drones hadn't noticed them being assembled. Phase 2, she announced to her command team. Stellar containment. We're going to stabilize the supernova. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Tammin laughed. You're insane. You know that, right? You can't stabilize a supernova. Nobody can. We can't stop it, Jiu agreed, but we can redirect it, contain the blast, prevent it from causing sector-wide devastation. Yuna brought up the technical Specifications. We've been building stellar dampeners. Massive energy field generators that can surround the star. When it explodes, the dampeners will channel the blast in a controlled direction away from inhabited systems. Meng added his contribution. We can use the supernova's own energy to power the containment field. The explosion provides the power we need to contain itself. It's elegant. Suho had already prepared the logistics. All equipment is in position. Construction crews are ready. We can begin deployment immediately. On the observation ships, the galactic observers were stunned. The humans had brought equipment for a second mission. They had planned beyond the evacuation. This was unthinkable. Ambassador Vexter contacted Dezhou directly. What are you doing? The evacuation is complete. Your mission is finished. You succeeded. Why risk yourselves further? Dezhou's answer was simple. Because we can. Because it's the right thing to do. And because if we don't, the supernova shock wave will damage dozens of nearby systems. Millions more beings could be hurt. Why wouldn't we try to prevent that? The Crow ambassador had no answer. In Crow culture, you completed your assigned mission and nothing more. Going beyond what was required seemed wasteful, but seeing the human approach, he began to wonder if his species had been thinking about things wrongly. The stellar dampeners deployed over the next week. They were massive structures, each one larger than a small moon. Tamins construction crews positioned them in a sphere around the dying star. Hygiene's satellite network expanded again, connecting the dampeners into one coordinated system. The work was dangerous. The star was violently unstable now, throwing out radiation and energy storms constantly. Several human ships took damage. 3 crew members were injured when a solar flare struck their construction platform, but Jinx medical teams treated them and the work continued. Why are we doing this? Young engineer asked Jinseo while recovering from radiation exposure. We already saved the Lamenians. Nobody asked us to do this. Jinseo smiled. Did you become an engineer because someone asked you to, or because you wanted to build things that mattered? The engineer thought about it. Because I wanted to make a difference. Exactly. This makes a difference. That's reason enough. The dampeners were positioned by day 18. Meng supervised the final calibrations, personally checking each field generator, each power coupling, each control system. There could be no errors. If the containment field failed, the supernova would spread unchecked through the sector. On day 21 of the 5th month, the star began its final collapse. Every sensor in the system screamed warnings. The core temperature spiked beyond measurement. The star's outer layers began to tear away. It's happening, Yuna announced. Supernova in approximately 4 hours. The human fleet pulled back to a safe distance. All non-essential personnel evacuated to ships at the edge of the system. Only the critical control teams remained, ready to operate the dampeners remotely across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched. The greatest stellar event in a generation was about to occur, and the humans were attempting something that had never been done before. Many predicted failure, some prayed for success. All watched. Jaiwu sat at her control station surrounded by her team. Hai Jin monitored the satellite network. Meng watched the power systems. Yuna tracked the stellar collapse. Tamin stood ready to coordinate any emergency. Repairs, Dezhou observed everything, prepared to make whatever decisions were necessary. The star collapsed, the core compressed beyond the point of stability, nuclear forces that had held the star together for billions of years finally failed. The rebound effect began. The supernova exploded with unimaginable violence. Light brighter than 100 suns erupted from the core, energy equivalent to entire planets being vaporized, blasted outward in all directions. The shock wave traveled at nearly the speed of light, and the human dampeners activated. 50 massive energy field generators came online simultaneously, creating a sphere of controlled space around the explosion. The supernova's energy hit the dampeners like a hammer striking an anvil. For 10 seconds, every indicator went red. The dampeners absorbed energy far beyond their designed limits. Metal superheated, control systems strained, power couplings overloaded, but they held. Meng's design worked. The dampeners used the supernova's own energy to strengthen themselves. The explosion that should have devastated the sector was contained, channeled, redirected into empty space. When the light finally faded, the star was gone. In its place was an expanding nebula, gas and energy, beautiful and harmless, confined within the boundaries the humans had set. The dampeners had survived. The containment field held. The sector was safe. In the control center, nobody moved for a long moment. Then Yuna started laughing, just quiet, relieved laughter. Others joined in. They had done it. Both impossible tasks completed successfully. Chancellor Orth sent another message, his energy form pulsing with colors that indicated emotion the translation software couldn't quite capture. You did not just save my people, you saved this entire region of space. You did not just complete your mission, you exceeded it beyond measure. Why? Dezhou answered. Simply because we could, and because it needed doing. Ambassador Vexler sent a formal communication to the Krell Empire's leadership. I must report that our assessment of humanity was fundamentally incorrect. They are not primitive, they are not limited, they are perhaps the most prepared and capable species I have encountered. I recommend we immediately establish closer cooperation with Earth. The young Krell engineer stood beside him, watching the contained supernova on the displays. They just kept building, backup after backup, plan after plan. They assumed nothing would work perfectly, so they made sure everything worked well enough. And they did more than asked. Vexler added, not for glory, not for payment, simply because they could help. There is wisdom in that approach. News of the human success spread through the galaxy at faster than light speeds. Earth's reputation transformed overnight. Species that had been dismissed as newcomers became the species that accomplished the impossible. Requests for human cooperation flooded in from dozens of governments on the horizon. Yuna did something the other species found remarkable. She published all the research data publicly. Every calculation, every design, every technique the humans had developed, she made it freely available to all galactic species. Why give away your technological advantages? A veil mathematician asked her. Yuna looked surprised by the question. Because others might need this someday. We didn't develop this technology to give Earth an advantage. We developed it to save lives. If someone else needs to save lives, they should have the tools. This attitude became the foundation of Earth's galactic reputation. Humans didn't hoard knowledge, they shared it. They didn't do the minimum required. They did what was needed and more. They didn't panic under pressure, they prepared for pressure and remained calm. The galactic engineering standards were rewritten based on human methods.